Joining us now is John Tolley from JT Law Firm to speak more about the Chauvin case, verdict, and impact on Long Island. Mr. Tolley, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Happy to be with you guys.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. So can you outline some of the key details that we learned in the Derek Chauvin trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm being a former prosecutor as well as a current criminal defense attorney, I found that one of the key details was the fact that other officers actually testified against Chauvin, including his former boss, the Minneapolis police chief, as to the methods that he used in terms of the knee on the neck and how that was unacceptable and not part of their training protocol, which is usually not the case when you have situations like this. We hear a lot of times of the blue thin line and things like that, but we had multiple officers testify against that, and specifically officers from his own jurisdiction. I know we had that one from Los Angeles that was as a paid expert, but you had two officers, one a police chief and one a officer that was in charge of the 5th precinct over there in Minneapolis, saying that that's not something that was allowed under their own protocols.
And why do you think that Derek Chauvin invoked his constitutional right to remain silent during the trial and declined to testify?
Well, as a criminal defense attorney, I usually try to get my clients not to testify. You have to remember that when they're subject to cross-examination, that's cross-examination by a trained prosecutor. And in this case, obviously, it's a homicide prosecutor who has a lot of experience. So typically you're dealing with a case where, and especially in this, where there's already that public opinion as to him and his innocence. And then you have a situation where you put him up against a trained prosecutor, and any other type of contradiction that Mr. Chauvin makes is going to be really exfoliated by the prosecution when it comes to their closing argument. So you don't want to subject your client to a situation where maybe they make a contradiction on the stand and give that prosecutor another argument on top of the evidence that they already have against them.
Interesting. So what can we expect this case to hold as a precedence for the future? Do you think more officers will be held accountable in police-involved deaths?
Well, I hope so. I definitely think it gives us hope, right? I mean, like I said before, in this situation, you had their own police chief testifying against them. So, if you have that type of involvement from officers who aren't the bad apples, and they will come in and say, hey, look, what he did was wrong, then I think absolutely. And then on top of that, you have the media and you have all of the experts weighing in, and the fact that, basically we had these riots and protests and things since May of last year. I think it's on the front of everybody's mind. I think we can see it in the media. I think we can see it in corporations in terms of what they're doing to bring attention to these issues. And as long as we kind of keep putting our feet in front of each other and allowing for these other officers to come out and testify against them and say, hey, look, that's unacceptable, I think it definitely sets a precedent. I definitely think it's a situation where these other officers that are doing things that are not right, I think they're probably made pretty nervous by the verdict that happened the other day.
And what comes next for both Derek Chauvin and for George Floyd's family?
Well, next for Mr. Chauvin is that obviously he has sentencing, which I believe is going to occur in about a month or two. And, I know there were multiple convictions, but according to Minnesota statutes, I think it was 609.035, he's only going to be sentenced for the most serious offense. So that's obviously going to be the highest murder charge. My understanding is that there's these things called guidelines that we do in terms of sentencing. So every crime is assigned a number, and based on that number and then your criminal history, there's a certain guideline of years. So my understanding is that with somebody with no criminal history, they're looking at about a 12.5-year range of being sentenced. However, in this case, my understanding is the prosecutors actually can ask for more than that. And what I found interesting is that they're going to use the fact that he was a police officer. They're going to use the fact that Mr. Floyd was, vulnerable because he was restrained at the time, and then that there were actually children present at the scene as a basis for what we call an upward departure, asking for more than what the guidelines recommend.
Once again, thank you so much for speaking with us, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Have a good day.
Thanks.